And thank you for joining me once again for my second Praxis video diary. Really appreciate you all being here. It is currently 5:34 on Tuesday, um, Tuesday, March 11th, which is almost a week past the due date. And I wanted to be honest, I know we're being flexible with due dates this year or this semester. Um, But the reason I put this off for so long was because I didn't have anything to say. Be transparent, that's something that's never happened to me. I've always been very vocal and felt very comfortable being vocal about social advocacy, but within the past few weeks, I've noticed that I've just run out of things to say. That's not to say that these issues don't require my attention anymore, that these issues aren't happening. I mean, in the past few days, Donald Trump has put so much is happening, and it's so overwhelming to the point where I don't even know what to think, what to say anymore. That's all by design. Systemic injustice is meant to overwhelm to the point where it's debilitating, where people can't enact change. Me being forced into silence, forced, being overwhelmed into silence is just what systemic oppression serves to do. It occurs when people reach a breaking point, and instead of using my breaking point to enact change, I used it to be justified in staying silent. And that enables the oppressive nature in our world to continue to exist today. It's filled with coloniality, different forms of slavery, destitution, and genocide. It's so hard not to be discouraged when consistently hearing about these things. All of these things are able to happen even while being masked by certain narratives of progress, of people saying, oh, it wasn't as bad as it was years ago, to kind of explain away the fact that racism and oppression is still very true and very real in our world today. All of this is able to happen because of our deeply systemic the oppressed system that we live in today, that the foundation of our world was built off of oppression. The system works to maintain white supremacy, to maintain white hegemonic powers. The TED Talk we watched a few weeks ago in class, Thurston describes the system as not just an overt acts of racism, but a system of structural advantage that favors white people over others in social, economic, and political arenas. It's not just about how individuals face oppression. Yes, that does matter, but it's not just about how individually I experience racism or individually how I experience sexism or what have you, or how someone different than me might experience classism or homophobia. It's not just about our individual stories, it's about how our society is built. It's fueled by a narrative of racial difference. Think about it throughout the course of our history about going from slavery, how slavery is justified because it's what God wanted, or Jim Crow, we can't allow these people to come into our society because they're not as civilized. Same thing goes with the Chinese American Exclusion Act, how these people aren't civilized enough to live in our country, but are civilized enough to build it from the ground up, even within Japanese internment camps, that putting these people in essentially a prison is justified because they have a potential opportunity to push destruction onto our country, which honestly there was no concrete factual evidence for. It was racial bias that was mainly used when making these laws, these societal norms that disproportionately affect communities of color and marginalized communities. This create a false sense of superiority among the white population, and it further embeds more bias into our modern day institutions. Hegemonic power is the root cause of all of this. Alicia Garza defines power as the ability to change your circumstances and the circumstances of other people. So when that power is concentrated unequally, it creates a breeding ground for exploitation because these people think they have this notion of false power over others. A system that favors one group over the other with an unequal distribution of power, it creates oppression. It's not just about a few bad eggs or a few people who unjustly think that they are better just because of the color of their skin, because of who they love, because of how much wealth they were born into, because of any arbitrary variable. It's the very structure of our society that's the problem. Some it's almost like a very messed up. The only analogy I can think of right now is a restaurant where kind of in your face, but the analogy goes, this restaurant serves these people the finest ingredients with the utmost quality service, while another group of people get scraps and are served with malicious tones and are in a place where they can tell they don't really feel welcomed. Let's think about it. In this restaurant, we have resources, we have ingredients and equipment. We have butter, milk, and eggs, and equipment to turn that butter, milk, and eggs into something of a good or a service for the customers. Those ingredients, those equipment translates to tangible and intangible resources like school funding or accessible health care or even like financial aid institutions would count as a resource. Um, But this other section of people, the other people who aren't upheld to the utmost importance in this society, they get the scraps or the leftovers or maybe necessarily the equipment that doesn't work anymore or the food that's not as good anymore. They get the leftovers. And this unequal distribution of goods and services limits the actions and rooms for room for growth and opportunity for this marginalized community of the restaurant, while the people who the restaurant is prioritizing get to use these resources to their advantage. Of this restaurant would reflect all the values. If it's serving American culture food, it kind of sends out a message to this other group of people that their values, their certain ways of communicating, often through food or through even the language on the menu or the decor around the room, it sends a message that this is the right way to live by. That the Americanized menu is the only option for this restaurant, for the people in this restaurant, forcing assimilation and cultural erasure. Of discrimination within the restaurant don't even have to be intentional. It's because of the boss's values and his mindset or her mindset going through the process of creating a restaurant is now pushed into the minds of its employees and its workers. So going in, these employees may have not even thought about how their actions may impact communities that are marginalized, but through their actions of working under this oppressive system, they are enabling the further systemic oppression that these marginalized communities face. the foundation of which the restaurant was built upon. No further policies or anything could be made just as long as the foundation of the restaurant was built on systemic biases. Their hiring practices, their rules, their dress code, their standards for food, all relies on this bias value in which the restaurant was made. Change every single aspect of the restaurant, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the entire restaurant was built in the ideology of this woven bias. It has been woven into the restaurant just like oppression has been woven into our society. We can challenge where these resources are going. We can protest, we can fight back, and yes, all of that is important, but it does not take away from the fact that our society was built on the backs of exploitation of others, and it cannot be reversed until our country is liberated through the dismantling of institutions that perpetuate these biases. The answer to our liberation essentially lies in shifting the narrative, not necessarily shifting it the way stories have ended or the events throughout a story, but almost how we perceive that story and how that reflects into our everyday lives. It relies on changing our perception of our interactions with everyday people as well as our perceptions of enacting with the institutions we deal with on the daily. The narrative of our society is heavily binary, as in there's a dominant power and a lesser power, or uncivilized and civilized, as well as like right and wrong. Um, it creates a hierarchy and creates a sense of an objectively right way to live. Society relies on a single story. It takes a fixed attribute and generalize it to a whole population, taking away their humanity and instilling the power in the hegemonic group right now, instilling the power to define their worth for them. System is so embedded with these power dynamics that even our own education system and our healthcare system or what have you plays into these fixed attributes and plays into the defining of other people's worth. Ask ourselves, who has the power? Who benefits from this narrative? Whose voices are heard and whose are not? And that will expose the true nature of our society's foundation. It will uplift marginalized voices and give them power to create change. Power to the truth. It gives power to these lived experiences of these marginalized communities that really counteracts the truth that our society has put on us from the get-go. It upholds voices to the highest degree and will make room for counter narratives. It's not about just changing the restaurant's policy, it's about changing the restaurant's mindset and values and the relationships within that restaurant, our society. The question comes, how are we able to thrive when we're perceived as merely numbers or as merely objects to the greater population? The answer is our world is extremely mechanic. That far too long we've created ourselves and the world around us like machines, like objects to be manipulated and controlled, but we're not machines. We're people who have feelings and who want relationships and have aspirations for our future. We're not machines, but that's what we get treated as. That far too long we've created ourselves and the world around us like machines, like objects to be manipulated and controlled, but we're not machines. We're people who have feelings and who want relationships and have aspirations for our future. We're not machines, but that's what we get treated as. We need to see the humanity in other people, to see their reality through our eyes and challenge our own perspectives. That's how we get out of this mechanical loop we are in. Often I find myself beating myself up about productivity and I guess success. Um, and it's been a very hard journey coming to terms with myself and how much I am willing to give in replacement to enjoyment of my life, almost, if that makes sense. And through therapy and lots of self-reflecting and critical thinking, I've come to realize that my only job here on this earth is to be a nice person who is respectful to people. Our capitalistic world is very reliant on this notion of survival of the fittest, do whatever, be whatever, to put yourself ahead, even if that means putting each other down. But in reality, we're not machines. We don't work like that. Our only job on this earth is to be a good person. And this class has a role to play. It's to be a kind human. Because even being committed to the act of being a helpful, approachable person dismantles this society that we are in. It prioritizes humanity over productivity. Our liberation begins. Even the smallest act of kindness can set precedent for other people around us to realize that seeing the humanity in other people and showing them with kindness is the first step forward. The transformation in our world will follow. The equal distribution of resources and opportunity will follow. It starts with ourselves. So to the me in the beginning of this video who did not know what to say, you don't have to. All you have to be is a kind person who relies on the lived experiences of other people and who questions the current society that I am living in, who sees the truth of who is benefiting, to whose stories are being heard to the highest degree. My job is to see the humanity in everyone, and that's how liberation will occur. That is it for me. Thank you so much for listening to me talk. I really appreciate the space to be vulnerable and to be open. So thank you for that, and thank you for listening.